Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's 2 o'clock, and I'd like to welcome everyone to matter number 8. We've got some more participants around the table for this session. So this matter is the Employment Town Centre and Culture Policies. So for those of you who haven't met us yet, I'm Dr. Rachel Bust, and this is my colleague, Ms. Caroline Malloy. So we are the inspectors jointly appointed to hold the examination of the Lewisham local plan. Before I go too much further, can everyone hear me? Looking towards the back of the room, some nods. Thank you. So could everyone please make sure mobile phones and any other devices that you've got are switched to silent whilst we're in the hearing sessions, and that your microphone is muted until you're invited to speak, so we can avoid any sort of disturbance and feedback. So from experience so far, you need to be quite close to these microphones. It doesn't tend to pick up from a distance. And that's quite important because we're being live streamed. So there may be people watching online. So does anybody present have any objection to the live streaming? I just turn to the council to remind us all about the fire alarms, evacuation procedures and facilities for this building, please.
Yes, so there is no planned test for the fire alarm. So if you hear the fire alarm, we will leave the building. The evacuation points are clearly signposted. Our evacuation rendezvous is on the Broadway next to Costa. Hopefully everyone is aware of where that is. That is where we will meet in the event of a fire alarm. In terms of facilities, toilets, etc., they are just out the doors to the left-hand side, clearly signed.
Thank you. So the procedure for this hearing session will take the form of a structured discussion, which we will be leading based on the agenda, which is also linked to the matters, issues and questions that have previously been circulated. Has everybody got a sight of an agenda? Yep. So we'll try and bring you in at a relevant point. If you do wish to make a point, if you could pop your nameplate on one side as the usual convention, and we'll try and bring you in as soon as we can. So to everyone taking part in the discussion, you've provided all your evidence to date. So the hearing sessions are not an opportunity to submit anything further in particular, and any comments that you are going to make during the hearing sessions need to therefore relate to the representations that you've already made. Please do respect each other. Allow people to finish their points before speaking. And questions need to come through us, even though you're trying to elicit answers from other participants. Does anyone have any questions about the process at this stage? No? Okay, so moving on to matter 8. We'll do some introductions, please. So I'm going to turn to the council first. If you'd like to introduce the team, start, Ms. Stewart.
I'm Angela Stewart. I'm the Principal Policy Officer in the Lewisham Council.
David Syme, I'm the Head of Strategic Planning at Lewisham.
Good afternoon. I am Karol Jakubczyk and I am the Planning Policy Manager here at Lewisham.
Dean Gibson, Principal Planning Officer.
Ian Hassan, Senior Planning Policy Officer at Lewisham Council.
Thank you. We'll carry on round the table. Mr. Hall, you're sitting in the audience. You do have a nameplate at the table. Did you want to participate in this session? Mr. Hall, would you like to introduce yourself to the table?
Alan Hall. I made a representation as a councillor. I'm no longer a councillor, so that's more of a declaration of interest. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Rob Shrimpton, planning consultant representing Howard Group.
Good afternoon, I'm Paula Carney from Carney Sweeney, representing Kitewood.
Good afternoon, Adrian Fox from Quad, representing Landsec.
Good afternoon, I'm Myenga Crosdale, representing the Arch Company.
Good afternoon, Alex. Christopher from Turley, representing the Arch Company.
Hello, Matthew Thomas from Michael Sparks Associates, representing Seagrow.
Thank you for that. So in this session, matter 8 is more about the requirements of the policies, and so we're not going to be going back over numbers. We're going to be looking at the operation of the policies and the criterion. So participants will have comments to make on various different policies. We have quite a number in this chapter. There's up to 21. So we'll be working our way through them. Some of them we have further questions on, some of them we don't have further questions on, but we will go through each one in sequence. So let's kick off with policy EC1. So it's keynote policy. So with the general overarching policies, there's more sort of an objective approach, an objective type led approach to the policies. In terms of the effectiveness, would EC1 be a policy that would feature in a reason for refusal?
If I may, I'll start and then may hand over. I think in terms of EC1, what it does is it sets the scene for the policies within the chapter ahead. So it provides the kind of strategic hooks that then follow on. So in terms of the practical application, it wouldn't be specifically this policy as a reason for refusal. That would be down to the subsequent policies which fall underneath EC1. But EC1 does set out some clear expectations and some important points, i.e. the commitment to work with stakeholders, etc., to promote and strengthen Lewisham's role in the London economy, etc. So yes, it provides and introduces those hooks, which then the subsequent policies provide additional detail, which would ultimately be the policies which are used through the development management process to determine planning applications.
I'm going to turn over the page to EC2. So on the agenda, I've got the hierarchy and the flexibility linking to my question 8.7. So in terms of the expanded permitted development rights and Class E and the flexibility that gives, we talked a little bit this morning about criterion E, and the council was going to talk to one of the participants to Lewisham House number 1 to go through some further details on that. So I'm not going to pursue that question much further. But I know that Knight Frank, in your hearing statement, paragraph 1.12, I think you got a point there. If it's about not being in the employment hierarchy and about the use being protected, is that no? Right. Okay. Sorry, the nameplate was too close, and I thought, oh, there we are. Okay. Right, moving on to the proposed modifications then. It's worth everyone having a copy of this somewhere close to hand if you've got it printed or whether it's electronic, because we've got some modifications throughout this session that we need to sort of keep going through. So please flag up if we've missed any as we go along. MO 45. So that's both EC6A and EC2B. So this is about consistency between the two policies, isn't it? Yeah. So I think for consistency, yes, that would be a main modification for both of those. I probably will repeat myself when we get to EC6, but that's covering both. Now, is there anything else that anyone wants to raise in relation to EC2 within the points of their representations? Right, let's move on to EC3 then. So this is high quality employment areas and workspace. So to the council first, related to my question 8.10. So in your response 8.10.2, you refer to how it could be made clearer. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on what you're thinking there, as to how it could be made clearer. This is about criterion A.
Yes, I'll take that. I think the point that was made in the question 8.10 is a valid one about sui generis uses, which would be appropriate within in terms of relating to EC3 high quality employment areas. I think the council notes that for clarification that we could add related sui generis uses within the policy to address that point.
I think that would be helpful, Mr. Syme, if we could add that to the action list, please. Thank you. Now, just looking at criterion A, little b, so this is all about the making provision for an appropriate level of internal fit out beyond the shell and core. Now, there's some representations on this in terms of how flexible is the policy and that criterion. So I think Lawrence Cohen and others made representations on that. So is there a sufficient flexibility where proposals don't have that occupier in mind, or that in fact even if an occupier requests just a shell, is this sort of going a little too far? Mr. Syme, are you taking this one?
I will do, yes. I think again the question is a valid one. I think the reason that we've got it in here is that from our experience, particularly about making viable workspace, it's incredibly important for occupiers to essentially go beyond that shell and core, albeit we sort of recognise that there may be occasions where, as you say, the kind of occupiers are specifically requesting that shell and core. So I wonder if we may take a look at that part A, criterion B, and just amend the wording to provide that flexibility.
Yes, I think that would be helpful. And in terms of, just before I move on from that, sort of A, little b, 4, you know, it talks about internal surfacing and finishing and blinds. So that's in the same sort of thing of, is that really going too far?
Yes, we recognise that may be stretching it, and we would seek to review that and probably remove that from the policy.
Thank you. Now, SEGRO in their response in their statement, paragraph 2.18 suggests where appropriate be inserted into a little b.
Yes, so I think that the requirement to specify the type of blinds and matters such as that is a bit over the top. It's a bit like asking house builders to specify the curtains in houses that they're building. And if we have conditions where we're looking to specify particular blinds for development, or perhaps getting a refusal based on that policy, which I don't say that would happen, but obviously our client is slightly concerned about that being in so definitively in the policy. So a bit of flexibility would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think that's going to be picked up in that action, isn't it?
Yeah.
We'll look at that criterion. Right, so moving on to criterion B of policy EC3. So criterion B has got that threshold. And I'm looking at that in terms of, in a Lewisham context, and SEGRO may want to come in on this point. Is that threshold reasonable in the Lewisham context?
The 2,500 threshold is specified within the London plan, but I take your question. We have no evidence to suggest that it's not reasonable to apply to the Lewisham context, and you know, in conformity with the London plan, we've specified that threshold.
I think Howard Lewisham had also picked up on this issue of criterion B. Is that the case? Seeking the deletion of criterion B.
Sorry, let me just find it. I'm just trying to find our reference. Well, I mean, we're getting into debate now just on low class floor space, but yes, that's what we were suggesting, yeah.
So in terms of your representation, seeking the deletion of it, why do you consider that's necessary for soundness?
Well, so we've set out in our statement that the concept of low cost floor space has, through this policy, been expanded, which is in conflict with the London plan, which is very focused on the concept of affordable workspace. So the London plan talks about the re-provision of low cost floor space as affordable workspace, and in this instance, trying to protect low cost floor space effectively prevents redevelopment of industrial estates. So, for example, the council is seeking to redevelop create a new, to reconfigure the Surrey Canal Road strategic industrial location with a new provision at Bermondsey Dive Under as a strategic industrial location. Now, I don't know that site very well, but if that contains low cost floor space, then it will be very difficult to redevelop it as a strategic industrial location, because the low cost floor space that exists will be protected.
Right, I'm just going to turn to the council, offering over the mic.
I think the participant may be confusing the policies. EC3 Part B relates to a threshold by which development must include a reasonable proportion of flexible workspace or smaller units suitable for micro, small and medium-sized enterprises. Again, this is a threshold that and a policy requirement which is taken from the London plan, and unless there's any specific evidence that's been provided which shows that, you know, in a Lewisham context that this is inappropriate, we'd like to continue with that or have that criteria remain in the local plan.
My representation related to EC4 about affordable workspace. So
Thank you. We'll come to EC4 in a moment. Anything else on criterion B? Anything finally from the council on that policy? No. Right, looking at EC4 then, low cost and affordable workspace. So our question's on 8.15, and I'm looking towards criterion F. So in the theme of viability, and I think Segro and Lansec and Howard Lewisham have got points on this policy. So criterion F, the council refers in your statement in paragraph 8.15.3, refer to applying viability review mechanisms, and I'm just curious as what are these, and is there something else that the policy needs to specify? Can someone help me for that?
So I guess I'll start by saying that the policy is the council is taking this policy approach with the objective of it being sufficiently flexible to accommodate circumstances where it is demonstrably justified to take a different approach, and that's the reason why Part F has been included in EC4 to allow that sufficient flexibility. In terms of the viability assessment work that could be submitted in support of an application, I will defer to my more learned colleagues for the specific detail, as development management is not my area of expertise. But I will assume that as with other areas of sufficient where sufficient flexibility is being sought through policy, it will be the standard type of open book exercise that provides the council and its appointed independent assessor with the information that's necessary to determine whether viability is an issue that merits further consideration through decision taking, and that an alternative approach is justified. I think there is a more, in anticipation of this point, there's a more general statement that the council wants to say, which is it goes back to the very beginning of this examination hearing process last week, and the sort of the fundamental visions that are behind the local plan, and about Lewisham being an open and inclusive place. I believe that the examination and the inspectors have clearly heard the messages around inclusivity in terms of access to new homes, access to employment opportunities, and access to other infrastructure networks, including sustainable transport. There clearly is, within this context, there's clearly a desire by the council to ensure that Lewisham's residents and communities, existing and future, have the ability to access entrepreneurial opportunities within the borough, and it's those startups, those potential SMEs that this policy is seeking to support going forward into the future, and ensuring that residents and communities are not priced out of the borough and are not forced to look beyond the borough boundary to set up those entrepreneurial businesses. And that's the importance of low cost and affordable workspace. Going back to my very first point, clearly the council does not want to find itself in a position where that endangers viability and prevents development and growth coming forward. Hence the desire for the policy to be sufficiently flexible to take into account relevant and appropriate evidence that should be considered by decision takers. Thank you.
Thank you. I think just in terms of my understanding, in your statement, you talked about viability review mechanisms. I fully appreciate the use of viability assessments and what they're designed to, but it was just the way you described it as viability review mechanisms, and I was thinking, is it any more than just that viability assessment accompanying a planning application?
If I may, in my experience, those could take a variety of formats, and I think are legitimate approaches that local planning authorities can pursue through the development management process. The obvious example that comes straight into my head, it's slightly in a different context, but it's the sort of clawback arrangements that could be introduced in relation to affordable housing. Obviously, working in a dynamic growth environment like Lewisham, we would hope that our development industry partners will be delivering their products in a timely manner upon receiving consent, and we shouldn't have to be waiting 2 or 3 years after consent for a sort of a trigger of viability review to come into place. Thank you.
So in terms of the viability assessments that you might receive, would you be expecting that for all sites? In my experience, it tends to be the larger sites that viability assessments are used for, particularly where it's going to be development and phased, and the review mechanisms that you're thinking of.
I think just to clarify, I think in terms of the viability assessment and the review mechanism are essentially thought of as two separate things. The viability review mechanism would be only appropriate within those larger scale site allocations over kind of multiple phases where you know, in a similar way to affordable housing, we may do a kind of a review mechanism at an appropriate point to see whether the viability has improved, etc. We wouldn't be expecting that on kind of smaller applications, which again, the viability assessment would be proportionate to the type of application that we would receive.
I think I can see it, Oberon. So Howard Lewisham, please.
Would you like us to respond? Yeah, but I think on the viability assessment, I have 4 points that we brought out in our hearing statement. The first is that the council's own viability assessment says that B2 and B8 development is not viable to provide affordable workspace. So straight off the bat, there's the council and evidence says that those two types of employment floor space cannot provide, those two types of employment floor space cannot provide affordable workspace. The second is that the evidence that they have provided is very limited. So it's explained in our hearing statement of paragraph 41, but there are 7 paragraphs in the table that look at the viability of employment developments, and of those, there are 33 developments. All of them, bar two, include residential development, and in some cases, we're talking residential units of hundreds of units. So none of these are an assessment of a pure employment development. So the viability evidence the council provided is simply not applicable to employment uses. The third point is that as a developer, when you are buying a site and trying to work out what to do, notwithstanding there may be a viability mechanism, that introduces all sorts of uncertainty. You have no idea when you're buying a site or thinking about redeveloping a site what level of affordable workspace you're going to provide. And yes, you might think you have a very strong case. You might think, well, I'm told that we'll be able to challenge this and reduce it, but it adds lots of uncertainty. Uncertainty means risk, and risk means a disincentive to invest. And this will act as a massive disincentive for developers to redevelop sites, because they'll be taking on a site thinking, well, wait a minute, what can I actually do here? Do I have to do I have to protect the low cost floor space that exists, bearing in mind it's a rundown industrial estate and it's by definition low cost? Will I have to provide affordable workspace? I'm being told there's a viability review mechanism, but I don't know what the outcome is going to be of that, not least of which there's then the cost of actually undertaking it and paying for the council's cost of reviewing it and the time it takes to do all of that. I mean, it's loads of uncertainty. And if, as the council suggested, this is really targeted at SMEs and small businesses and those under the arches, well, that's fine. But then it should be targeted towards those locations. So it should exclude strategic industrial locations, which, as we've set out in our evidence, have a very different and very important role to play in London and Lewisham. And they should be allowed to get on and perform that role without having to deliver affordable workspace.
Thank you. I think your mobile phone's a little bit close to that microphone. I think it was just generating a little whistle at times. I'll come to you in a moment. Just give the council an opportunity to respond.
I think what we would see is that the reasons that we have the policy are clear from Carol's eloquent description, but I think the policy is flexible enough to deal with those situations. I note paragraph in the supporting text 8.29 specifically references Class B2 industrial and Class B8 storage and says, and I quote, "In these cases, a lower level of affordable workspace and stroke or discount rent may be permissible. This is recognizing these types of industrial uses may exhibit lower land values, which can in turn impact on viability." So, I think we are sort of generally agreeing with that. However, we feel that the need for affordable workspace, within the borough is evident, and we want to try to encourage that. Notwithstanding that, the viability appraisals are there as a mechanism to allow that flexibility. Again, what I would say is that there's no evidence that this policy and indeed, we are through the development management process already trying to achieve affordable workspace within our employment areas, and there's no evidence to suggest that there's stifling sites coming forward, stifling development on strategic industrial land, on our ELSIS land, which, there continues to be continued interest in providing new workspace in our strategic industrial land and our ELSIS, and indeed the co-location options that we will probably come on to as well.
Mr. Gibson, I think you want to follow on with some more detailed.
Yeah, just to pick up on the point about about a developer not having certainty about who would occupy a unit going forward. It's usual to actually have a planning condition that says the units shall that in a mixed use scheme, for example, that residential units will not be occupied until the actual commercial units, the workspace units, are actually provided. So there is an opportunity there to actually provide the workspace units going forward with marketing it at the same time as residential units. So the actual point about not knowing who's going to be occupying a unit doesn't really, it kind of falls away. You don't have that certainty anyway.
Can I come back with 2 points on that?
Is it directly related to that?
Yes, I'm
particular-
in direct response. So
Okay.
just to be clear, the policy requires affordable workspace unless you do a viability assessment. Supporting text is not policy. And not only is it not policy, but the assessment says that B2B8, I think I'm just trying to find the words, may not need to contribute. Well, that is directly in conflict with the viability assessment, which says it's B2B8 cannot viably support affordable workspace. So the fact that supporting text says, or we may consider not providing it is in itself is in itself already directly in conflict with the viability assessment. And again, it's risk. You know, a developer taking on a site, thinking, do I have to do this? Do I not have to do this? That's risk that they don't want to take on.
Excuse me, Mr. Shrimplin, could you try the mic that's next to you?
Shall I do that instead?
Thank you.
Is that better? So that was the first point. The risk still exists. I do fully appreciate what the council are trying to achieve, and that they're trying to give that flexibility to developers. But this is a situation where with B2B8 floor space is demonstrative in their own evidence that affordable workspace is not viable. And the evidence they provided about affordable workspace for other sorts of employment development is only viable where it's accompanied by residential development. So it's, I suspect, it's not even viable there. So you're asking the plan. We have to have a plan-led system, not a plan-led system which is subject to, well, we'll do some work when you submit an application. It's a plan-led system. The development industry needs certainty about what's going to happen when they develop a site, and the policy does not offer that. The second point with regard to securing of occupiers via condition is a separate viability point. But again, the example given there was to do with a mixed-use development of employment and residential. I'm not interested in mixed-use development of employment and residential. I'm interested in what happens in strategic industrial locations where residential is not allowed. And in those instances, this will prevent development coming forward. It will act as a massive disincentive.
Council want to respond to that?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure the council has anything further to add. I think the policy has the kind of flexibility within the policy. Again, there is no evidence that's been presented to demonstrate or show that this policy would stifle development. In fact, we are receiving strategic industrial land applications. You know, we would expect and we would consider the viability of that on a site-by-site basis. Again, the council considers that the policy has the flexibility baked into it.
I was just interested in the point on the viability assessment. Obviously, the viability assessment looked at B1 floor space and the viability of B1 floor space providing affordable workspace. Just where was the reference in relation to the study, the assessment saying that B2 and B8 isn't viable? Viability study. And I would like to ask the councillor's view on that.
I'm sure it's in my statement, but if I could have a couple of minutes to look for it, I'll come back.
Yes, that would be helpful. Thank you.
So there are two tables of relevance in the viability study. So there's table, is it 4.41? And that lists the different sites that have been assessed in the viability study to see whether they are actually going to be viable with the different mixes of affordability, affordable workspace. Site reference 25 is the only one that I could see that was relevant to a B2 and or B8, and that's listed as storage. Yeah, table 4.
What table did you say?
Table 4.11
4.
in the viability study that the council prepared.
4.1.1.
1.1. They've then assessed the.
That's page 22, if that helps.
The assessment of affordability is then set out in table 6.6.1. And when you scroll down to site 25, which you'll notice has no affordable, no residential. There's only two that don't have residential units in. The one above it, I think, is called student housing. So that's perhaps a bit misleading. So the only site that has been assessed for affordable workspace on a pure commercial basis is site 25, and the whole line is red. And if you go to the first column, it says starting residual with no discount, i.e. no discounted workspace. Even that is showing as being not affordable, or not viable, sorry. So the council have said that there's no evidence in policy to say it isn't viable, but equally they haven't said that there is evidence to say that it is.
Just a point of clarity, I said that there's no evidence to suggest that it's stifling development on our industrial sites. Clearly the policy provides a flexibility and acknowledges that there may be an issue with viability in affordable workspace for B2, B8, and that's reflective in the policy and the supporting text underpinning that policy.
Just on that, the policy is not in operation yet, so of course it's not affecting applications.
Sorry, could you just
So
repeat that question?
The point was there's no evidence that development is being put off or being stifled, as I was suggesting, by this policy. But of course, this policy is not yet adopted. It doesn't have any weight, so there's no way to know now whether it will have an impact. I have a live application in the council at the moment on a strategic industrial site, and I can say it is very much at the forefront of our minds how this policy might operate in the future for future phases of development.
Just in terms of the point on the viability assessment, is there a particular statement in there which states that B2 and B8 isn't viable to provide affordable workspace, or were you just drawing on that one example in the table?
Well, that's my conclusion from the assessment.
The study doesn't explicitly state that, does it?
What it does, I was just looking because that was your previous question, that it says that I think it's in the table that was just referenced previously, 6.1, it doesn't look at any B2 or B8 style developments. It just looks at B1 mixed use developments. So there's no evidence about B2, B8. And so my understanding of the reason for that was because they were either there wasn't any, or that they weren't considered able to they weren't considered likely to be viable, so they were just overlooked entirely.
Site 25 is referenced as storage, presumably is B8.
I think that is a description of what, I mean, the other description, I don't know if, I think that's a description for current site use. I'm not sure what that means. It just says site. So I don't know. I mean, the other ones further down the list are site names. So I'm assuming that those are existing use rather than proposed use. because, like I say, most of them are names. But it's, I mean, it's not very clear.
Mr. Syme or someone from the council?
Yes, again, I think the council has added all it wants on this matter. We believe that the policy is flexible enough to provide the developers with a simple option of providing a viability assessment for B2, B8 to demonstrate that it's not viable, and that will be determined through the development management process.
If I could come back.
Yeah.
I think that the point is that the policy requires any application for just a B2 and or B8 development in, for example, an area of SIL has to demonstrate or has to comply with the policy unless you can demonstrate that the viability suggests otherwise by undertaking a viability assessment as part of the planning application process. Now, the point that has been made by the other representative is, I don't want to go too much over that, but there's no viability assessment in the evidence base that demonstrates that a development of a B2, B8 development in an area of SIL can afford that affordable workspace. Now, the starting point for policy needs to be assumed that the policy is making a requirement that can be afforded by development. Otherwise, you're not in compliance with the guidance on viability set by the government, which says that the policy should be clear and that the viability assessment for applications should only be taken in effectively exceptional circumstances. But what the other representative and myself and our clients and other people in the industry, I work for a multitude of different industrial occupiers. They will say that they will pretty much have to be putting in a viability assessment with every application, which means that in our view, the policy is not sound because that shouldn't be the starting point. I've got the reference for the viability guidance as well, if you would. So it's paragraph 002. And that's in the planning practice guidance relating to viability, which was March 2014, and then updated in February 2024. Did you want the ID number as well?
No, that's fine. You
Okay,
can give enough dates and we can track that one down. Thank you. Unless the council want to say anything else, we've heard the views on this, but if the council wish to say something, I'm fine with that.
No, the council has nothing further to add, and will be guided by the inspectors.
Just to say as well, we are having a separate section on viability. That's something we can maybe pick up again as part of that.
So just moving on to evidence for some thresholds. So we've got some. So looking at criterion D, we've got a threshold of the affordable workspace at 50%. And developments must provide at least 10% of the rentable floor space as affordable workspace at 10% of market rents. So I think there's been some concern from representations on whether the evidence actually justifies this, and why should B2 and sui generis uses contribute to sort of 10%. So to the council first, what aspect of the evidence do you use to justify that aspect, please?
Yeah, maybe if I start and then hand over for some more detailed comments. I think the policy or the question is interrelated to the previous question about specifically to do with B2, B8 and sui generis. Clearly, the viability study 2022 looked at and tested employment floor space. The council acknowledges that in terms of the testing of B2 and B8, it is limited. The viability study under paragraph 1.7 states, we have tested emerging requirements on schemes which provide new or replaced B1 floor space at 10% and 20% of floor space with discounts of 20%, 30%, 40% and 50%, and then draws its conclusion. I think the council concedes that the evidence specifically for B2, B8 isn't as apparent. However, acknowledging that, you know, we do have the kind of viability hearings, there may be some further work that the council can do in the meantime to look at that and address that issue.
Okay, so just moving on to unintended consequences and criterion B. In terms of how would the plan respond to unintended consequences? I mean, this is going to the sort of flexibility point, isn't it?
So I think the council acknowledges in its response to matter 8 MIQ 8.18 that there is the potential for unintended consequences, and in this case, that's the possibility of underinvestment in already low cost or poor, well, by implication, poor quality employment floor space. I think the council would highlight within its response that's not an unusual scenario to encounter, and it isn't limited, in fact, to the issue of employment floor space stock. It could equally apply to other uses where there is a desire to retain. Maintain a portfolio of low cost or affordable stock. However, as the council points out in its response at paragraph 8.18.1, there is an alternative perspective on this, that Part B will secure the retention of existing affordable workspace portfolio, which occupiers can invest in proportionately as they need, and thereby, I think, by virtue, retain the sort of low cost provision that's available on those sites. As per the response, this is what happens in reality.
Mr. Gibson, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, so normally affordable workspace as well is secured through planning obligations through Section 106s that come forward as part of development proposals, whereas low cost businesses are already in place and they need protecting, so that they don't come forward specifically as part of development proposals. They're already there. So, for example, railway arches are there, they need protecting. That's what the policy, I think, is also seeking to achieve.
Thank you. So if something is a low cost workspace that's being protected, is there a risk that the upgrades would then take it from being within that low cost space and it becomes a higher quality space?
That's not my experience. I dealt with a site called the Apollo Business Site, the Apollo Business Centre, which has a major mixed-use development on it. And next to the site is railway arches. They've maintained the access into those railway arches, the vehicle access, and they're still operating, and they will continue to operate because they're part of a separate land parcel, even though they're in the same site allocation. They're still operating separate of that development. So it doesn't necessarily mean that new development will result in an uplift in the cost of units for people to occupy.
Thank you. Can I come to Mr. Michael Sparks first, and then if no, yes.
Sorry, I was just getting it down to get a view. I think you probably know where I'm going to come at it from. The consequences for areas of sill, which are meant to be the main reservoirs of industrial land within London, because there has been quite a bit of loss, and so they're meant to be the kind of the focus for development of employment uses. And I just think that there's too many kind of issues getting in the way. I mean, when we're talking about low cost kind of workspace, to redevelop areas of sill these days where we're under pressure to intensify, to accommodate all of the things that we need to do from other policies, the urban greening, sustainability, high thermal efficiency envelopes, kind of running out of space to also provide for the needs of occupiers with service yards, car parking, because there's a variety of different formats out there. And I think that the consequences could be that you are stifling the development of those sites, because you're trying to put in what could be quite small units into a development that can't be easily phased, because you're doing one building for a specific occupier rather than a phased development, which is some of the points the council were making, where yes, if you have a phased development, fine, but when you're doing what are going to be quite discrete developments, they could be reasonably large, trying to squeeze in smaller workspaces with other occupier security requirements, etc., it becomes quite a challenge. So I think that's one of the unintended consequences that could come forward from this whole kind of policy.
And for the Arch Company?
Right, yeah, if I may come in, there's a slight crossing over here because there's an arch policy, a specific policy coming in, but clearly they interrelate, and whether it becomes one arch. I don't know whether it's best to pick up the kind of arch component here on that, or
I think if it's related to this,
that particular criteria,
yeah, this policy, if it's more, should we say, more arch specific,
yeah,
we'll come back to it in the arch policy. I'm going to turn to the council.
Yeah, I think having heard the representations made by the participants, I think I want to say that I think we're generally after the same thing and the same outcome. It's just about what the policies are, you know, how the policies are constructed to get us there. You know, we are very much supportive of intensification of employment uses within our strategic industrial locations. That is what, you know, we want to create more employment floor space and create more jobs within the borough. Nevertheless, I think we recognise that affordable and low-cost workspace is also significantly important for the borough, for the residents, future and existing. So I do wonder whether, in terms of looking at specifically Part B, I can see that there could be, in terms of the way you read it, unintended consequences, and that's certainly not what we're trying to achieve. I also wonder whether or not there's a need to think about this in relation to the hierarchy of employment land, strategic industrial land versus ELSIS versus the arches, etc. And maybe that's a way in which we can iron out some of the concerns raised by the participants, but still protect low cost and affordable workspace.
There's a Toblerone up at the back there.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had 3 points. I think firstly, in response to the suggestion, I do think this is a very blunt policy that doesn't take into account liabilities we've discussed, locational considerations which we may come on to, and some sort of a hierarchy or some more considered approach towards development would make a big difference. The second point is that the policy surely cannot be found sound if the council accept that it is likely to have unintended consequences. I mean, as they've said today and as they've said in writing, if it's going to have those unintended consequences, by definition, it cannot be found sound. And the third is that this criterion B talks specifically about low-cost floor space. In answer to your question, the council referred to, on 2 or 3 occasions, affordable workspace. Now, I mean, I think this is very confusing in the policy. Low-cost floor space is different from affordable workspace. And it's evident from the way the policy is worded and how it's been discussed this afternoon that those two are not, the difference between those two are not understood. If you look at the London plan, it's clear. Affordable workspace is that which is retained at below a market value. So you might have a very high quality unit, which is a discounted rate. You might have a very low quality unit, which is a discounted rate. That is affordable. It's maintained below the market level, similar to affordable housing. Low cost floor space is simply floor space that costs not very much because it's perhaps not very good quality, or it's not very easy to access, or it's run down. If that is what criterion B is talking about, is protecting that floor space. Now, if that floor space exists in an industrial location, there's no way, with the greatest respect, you can redevelop it or improve it and it still remains low cost. Who's going to invest money in a unit, make it better, make it more attractive, make it weather tight, make it meet standards, in addition to all the BNG, car parking, everything else, and still it be cheap? It's cheap because it's cheap. And I'm not saying there isn't a place for that sort of floor space. I'm not saying it's not important to the economy and it's not important to growing the economy, but it's important in the right locations and in strategic industrial locations, which are meant to be the drivers of the economy. If you protect some of that, like the sites I'm talking about, it's low quality Victorian warehousing, it's low cost for a number of reasons, constrained, there's not enough car parking, constrained units, broken windows, doesn't meet heat requirements, doesn't have the sufficient power supply. It's low cost for a reason. If that is protected, it won't be redeveloped. Simple as that. And I think it's very important that the policy is clear, whether it's talking about affordable workspace or low cost workspace. The London plan is clear that when it defines what affordable workspace is, as I explained to you. It's also clear what low cost floor space is. And it says, as well as this is paragraph 6.3.4, as well as ensuring a sufficient supply of affordable business space, the Mayor also wishes to support sectors that have cultural or social value, such as artists, designers, makers, charities, voluntary and community organisations, and social enterprises, for which low-cost space can be important. So it's not talking about opening up to the broad economy or people. It's very specific in what it's targeted at. Again, this policy has broadened it out just to offer low-cost floor space, and the unintended consequence of that, which is quite clear, is it's going to prevent development coming forward.
Thank you. So, just in terms of what you are seeking, have you got some thoughts in mind that you could perhaps discuss with the council to take out of the hearing session, and maybe thrash that out a little bit more if there's something that we could move on?
Yeah, I mean, what we just caught me slightly on the hub earlier, but we were suggesting that the deletion of criterion B, or at the very least, it to be made more focused on what actually low-cost floor space is, number one, and number two, exclude strategic industrial locations from that.
Okay, just in terms of those two sort of asks really that you're wanting from the council, whether or not there's some alternative wording or some definitions or some clarification that we could possibly look at.
Yes, I don't think any of this is insurmountable. I think actually having this conversation has been kind of useful and constructive. The council hears what the participants are saying, and I think there is a solution here. What I'd ask from the inspectors, if I may, if we can take that away, we can review the wording in that policy, and particularly around B, we'll work with our partners here to try to reach a kind of compromise or a position which is beneficial for all. And, just to say, I think we are all wanting the same thing here. It's just about the policy mechanisms around that. So if I may, we can take that away.
I think that's helpful. That would be a good action to take.
Just to clarify, part B on reading it does seem to relate to low cost workspace. It doesn't mention affordable workspace. Just picking up the point about the clarity between low cost and affordable workspace. It seems to me that reading part B just relates to low cost workspace. Is that?
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah.
If it's helpful, Inspector Malloy, my colleagues and I would refer you to London Plan Policy E2C, small 1 and 2.
Okay, let's just move along. Where have we got to? So the reuse of brownfield land. So 8.19. I think this is another Howard Lewisham point that you had about there's not enough. Well, there's not an allowance for existing buildings to support the redevelopment of brownfield land, and the fact that might act as a disincentive. Have I summarised that correctly?
Well, broadly, and I think you picked up in your question when you asked about the similar mechanism like this exists for affordable housing, where essentially it's a net calculation. And the reason being that if you have a site, as you like to have, you're not going to have empty sites. So they will be brownfield sites, and brownfield sites have there's an inherent cost in clearing them and decontamination, everything else. So there's already that burden they have to bear. If you then have to have a calculation of affordable workspace on the gross value, it's a disincentive, it's an extra burden to bear. Simple as that.
Thank you. I think that takes us into the calculation. I was going to ask the council how the requirement for affordable floor space is calculated.
The calculation is obviously set out in table 8.2, the affordable workspace. Well, that relates to payments in lieu. I think as is pointed out, we would be looking at the affordable workspace on the proposed, and I think the point is, or the point that has been made is that should be on the net. If that's the question, I think. I mean, we would generally be, if we were relating this, for example, to, in a similar way to affordable housing, we'd be looking at affordable housing based on the amount of residential development coming forward and the percentage on that. So the 50% target or the 35% threshold would be on the kind of gross residential target, and that's the approach that we've taken through this policy. Currently.
Right, just moving down to the scope and relationship with London Plan Policy E3. I think that's related to that affordable workspace. I'm looking towards Howard Lewisham, Mr. Shrimplin again.
Still thinking. I'll ask. The calculation of the affordable workspace requirement, I'm not sure entirely had a full response in terms of how that would be calculated. But it does say further details would be set out in the planning obligations SPD. Has the SPD been produced? It's just I think there's an issue referring to an SPD if it hasn't actually been produced yet, and will that set out the calculations being arrived at?
Yeah, it hasn't been produced yet, no. So yes, that the intention was to prepare that in parallel with the local plan, but it hasn't been done yet.
And do you have a program for preparing SPDs in terms of it's not available now? Is it whereabouts? Is it in the to-do list?
It is on the top of our to-do list, right after these hearing sessions. So it will be something that we turn our attention to after the sessions.
Yeah, but you can see my point in terms of referring to an SPD actually in the policy that's not prepared yet. So I'm just wondering whether that might be better in the supporting text rather than the actual policy itself. I think if it was in place, that it could be referred to in the policy. But just coming back, I might have, it's rather warm in here, I may have missed the point in terms of how that calculation has been arrived at. In terms of the formula for calculating payments in lieu of the provision of on-site affordable workspace. If you could just clarify.
So table 8.2, affordable workspace payments in lieu. We have leaned heavily on our external consultants for this. Who prepared the viability assessment, but also have been involved in preparing formulas of this nature. So we've asked for their advice, and this is the calculation that, again, through their experience working on a number of local plans, have suggested. Again, we're happy to take any detailed questions away and get our consultant to provide any detailed questions on table 8.2 and the formula in due course.
That's set out in the viability study.
If we could take that away and get back to you if that's at all possible.
Okay, so I was going to explore London Plan Policy E3, and Howard Lewisham had made some comments on this, but this goes back to the earlier discussion about the consistency, and I think we're going to take that away as an action, so as part of that.
Indeed, yes. Yep.
Is there anything else from Howard Lewisham on that point?
On consistency with London Plan E3?
Yes.
I mean, I would just say just more broadly that policy E3 is in the London Plan is quite specific. It talks about it talks about locationally specific, use specific. It's quite a targeted policy, whereas the local plan policy has broadened it out massively and then has those unintended consequences. So it does need to be reviewed.
Okay, thank you. I think that's going to be picked up in the discussion outside the hearing session, isn't it? So just moving on to criterion G of policy EC4, I'd like to get to the end of EC4 and then take a break. So moving down to criterion G, there's concern that meanwhile uses would be prevented by criterion G. Is that how the council reads criterion G?
It's not the intention. It'd be useful to understand an example of where that would be the unintended consequence. I mean, clearly, if there's a viable, affordable workspace on site at present, the council would be seeking to retain that or replace that through the kind of pre-application discussions. But clearly there will be a need to assess the applicant or the application on a site-by-site basis through the development management process. Certainly the intention there is not to stymie any meanwhile use, appropriate meanwhile use as part of Part G.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to Howard Lewisham because I think you'd given some examples of this, hadn't you?
Well, we've given various examples at the end of our hearing statement about different policies that have been adopted in London, which cover various of the points we've been talking about. So, for example, the previous point about gross floor space versus net floor space is one that's picked up, and other policies are more locationally specific. On this particular point about meanwhile uses, it arises. So, for example, you have an industrial estate, you have one unit that's on a lease for another 5 years. You therefore the other uses, excuse me, the unit might become empty, so you put them on a short-term lease. And it's a rent-only lease rather than a rent and repair lease. And you do that because they're only there for a short period of time. They get a cheaper rent because they know they're for a short period of time. And they get a cheaper rent because they know it's a lower quality unit that's only on rent and not rent and repair. So that the quality of the unit deteriorates. But you're doing that because you are anticipating redeveloping it and waiting for the long leases to expire. If you put in there someone on a low cost rent for all of those reasons I've explained, then suddenly that unit is protected because it's a low cost floor space and you can't then redevelop it. So what we were suggesting is, and I'd appreciate the policy says consideration will be given. Well, that's not clear. That again, development plans that we've talked about need to provide certainty and developers need certainty. So we're just saying that should be, those words consideration will be given should be deleted and just replaced with that they will be excluded. Meanwhile, as in meanwhile uses will be excluded.
Okay, thank you. Does the council want to respond to that one in?
Yes, so I just need to get my thing. The policy intention for meanwhile use is actually in accordance with policy HC5 of the London Plan, point A, point 4 of that policy, which provides consideration for the use of vacant properties and land for pop-ups or meanwhile uses for cultural and creative activities to stimulate vibrancy and promote diversity in town centres, cultural quarters and other areas. So it could include Seal, for example.
I think just to pick up the point in terms of terminology as well. I mean, obviously, I appreciate your view in terms of providing that absolute certainty, but on a pragmatic level, there is always a degree of flexibility and pragmatism which is applied through the kind of development management process. And in applying this policy, consideration will be given to affordable workspace that has been secured on a temporary basis as a meanwhile use. Again, the council would contend that that does provide a kind of degree of flexibility in terms of that discussion. And I don't think we can ever provide the absolute certainty that maybe some of the participants are requiring here. I think there is a degree of flexibility within the wording of the policy.
Thank you for that. I think I've heard views on that, and I think we can form our own view based on everything that we've heard. Thank you. There's just so on the agenda, there's a proposed modification, MO42 on the list. Typographical. So I think we've said before, sort of typographical ones wouldn't be main modifications by and large. So anything that's just a typographical, so that would be an additional modification. Right. I think we'll take a break. I think it's a good time to take a break, and then we'll come back and look at strategic industrial locations. So, shall we say 15:40? So 20 minutes. Okay, we're adjourned until 15:40. Thank you.
be okay if someone did it more than
But this one.
Welcome back. It's 3:40. So we're now up to the point on the agenda, strategic industrial locations. So policy EC5. So there's 3 bullet points on that agenda. I think I'm just going to start with the council for the evidence that underpins criterion B. So that's question 8.24. And I'm particularly looking at your statement 824.3.
Yeah, so criterion B essentially is seeking to manage proposals on land that adjoin strategic industrial locations to ensure that new uses do not by themselves compromise the continued operation and effectiveness of their strategic industrial activity. I think we're in the fairly fortunate position in terms of locations that the majority of our strategic industrial land is effectively bounded by significant bits of infrastructure, and therefore development sites adjacent to that wouldn't necessarily have an immediate impact. Nevertheless, there is an area of strategic industrial land to the south of Catford, which does have 2 edge conditions which are on to a residential development. And I think criterion B, or part B of that, is simply acknowledging that there needs to be a sort of understanding that that development has to be has to respond to the strategic industrial land location and nature, so that it doesn't effectively compromise its effectiveness as a strategic industrial area.
Excuse me, Inspector. Just add to that as well, policy EC5 of the London Plan Part D, E5 of the London Plan Part D, also reiterates or supports the position the council's taken in relation to Part B of that policy. Thank you.
Thank you. That's helpful. Just moving on to question 8.25, sort of certainty. And in the council's statement, you refer to industrial employment use led. So I think I know what you're about to say, but to give you the opportunity, how do you secure this? I think Mr. Gibson alluded to it earlier.
Yes, I think we obviously spoke about this within the session on requirements, and I think there was a general sense that the policy could be a little bit more explicit about the types of uses for the hierarchy of employment locations, and I think we're happy to explore that. There was a suggestion that we look at some ratios, which we were, debating whether that would be useful or effective. But again, that's something that we could take a look at. And then in terms of how we would manage that, it would be as schemes come in through the development management process, we would then be assessing the uses that are being proposed. In terms of strategic industrial land, there is clearly criteria within the London plan which identifies what appropriate uses should be located there. That would be the kind of starting point, and that's generally speaking the B2, B8, and there are also the Class E, G brackets 3, which can be applicable there as well.
Okay, thank you. So as part of that action that you've got on the list of looking at that one again, so thinking about other uses that might be permitted as part of that industrial employment use-led approach, we'll come into that action, thinking about the clarity of it. I'm just wondering whether that's an interpretation of the policy or whether that's not meant to be sort of inferred. So what other uses may be permitted as part of the industrial employment use-led approach?
Apologies, it might be the heat in here, but I'm wondering, could you repeat the question?
So I was just looking to explore what other uses may be permitted as part of the industrial employment use-led approach. I'm wondering whether that just takes us back to the London plan and the guidance that gives.
I think that would be the clearest for clarity. I think that would probably be the best approach. And we can provide reference to that and provide the kind of details of that. I think that covers quite a broad range, and the sort of types of uses that we would find acceptable within the strategic industrial land. What we may have to look at is whether there is any of those Class E G brackets 3 which may be appropriate within strategic industrial land but are not captured by the London plan criteria. And if I may, if we could take that away and have a look at that and just bring that back to the inspectors. I think, clearly the London Plan 2021 was obviously published at a time where Class E hadn't fully evolved. There were suggestions about changing the use class, but now that we're fully into that, I think we probably do need to take a look at that and see if there are particular uses that we would be supportive of.
Thank you. I think that would be helpful because I think you said earlier that as Class E is evolving and it's embedding itself as more developments come forward using that, then I think you'll probably have a better feel for what might be appropriate or not appropriate. So if that could be an action to think about and reflect on, if there's anything in particular that you wouldn't wish to see within the sills, perhaps.
I think that the council can certainly do all of those things. The one word of caution is that whilst the council is excited by the opportunity that Class E brackets G brackets 3 brings to the party, our colleagues in the Greater London Authority are more wary and are I mean, I can say this because they're not here today, but they're more rooted in a traditional sort of 19th century industrial past than we are, if I can say that. It's slightly tongue in cheek, and there may be some aspects of Class E brackets G that they're less comfortable with, because they are, I think, legitimate, and in their defence, they are legitimately seeking to protect the sort of the heavy industrial offer that is at risk from is at risk from sort of perhaps speculative development that might result in its loss and displacement to less sustainable locations beyond the Greater London boundary, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, and they may of course be tuning in. Yes, I think that might be helpful. I'm wondering whether or not it would be worth a conversation with your colleagues at the Greater London Authority on this, because I'm conscious that yes, it's your plan. You want to evolve the plan, and we want to try and make it as flexible as possible, and give that guidance and certainty. But obviously, the modifications will come through, and it's a process. I wouldn't want to find ourselves in where they had concerns. So I would suggest that if it's possible to have a conversation about that topic, that would be a good thing to do.
Absolutely.
Where we are now.
Yes, we can take that away. Yep.
Is there anything else on strategic industrial locations that anyone has any particular issues to raise? No? Thank you. Anything finally from the council on sills? Thank you. Right, let's move on to policy EC6, the locally significant industrial sites. So policy EC6, we've got some sites in there. I think I mentioned this earlier on about, sites are listed in some policies and not others. So is it something that the council would wish to have consistency across their policies and listing the sites? Or is it a case of keeping the sites listed in table 8.1 and just cross referring all policies back to that source?
Yes, I think the preference would be the latter, so that we have the overarching table with the hierarchy, because I think that provides the kind of context as well, in terms of the kind of overall hierarchy and the sites that fall under that.
Now, I note from the employment background paper, the LC6, that it talks about not all designated locally significant industrial sites have corresponding site allocations. I'll just ask an open question on that. What's the reasoning for that?
The site allocations that we've identified are ELSIS with the opportunity for co-location, so the opportunity to provide improved employment floor space and then residential above. There are a number of sites where whilst the council is supportive of overall of the kind of co-location idea in principle, there are a number of sites which are performing well, have good and strong kind of stock, are of are, as I said, performing well, and therefore we haven't identified those sites as sites which would be beneficial for co-location, including residential above. So we've only included the ELSIS which have the opportunity or where we see co-location occurring.
So in terms of criterion D and the list of sites, when I was looking at table 8.1, we've got 16 in there, and there were only it only said 12 of the 16 are suitable for co-location. So I think that's your point about not everything is a suitable site for co-location, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
So just turning to the employment land background paper, LC6, there's the footnote 31 there that suggests that the sites that are in the policy itself are not correct. Just wondering whether that's something to do with sites C and G that are listed there. I'll just give you a moment to find that. On page 18 of that document, LC6, if it helps.
From memory, if it serves me correctly, that I think there are some discrepancies in the way that some of those sites are described, and indeed that I think that's partially addressed through the questions under matter 8. My apologies. That is questions MIQ 8.31 and I believe 8.32. So it's the titling. I think they're all there, but they just need it's the sort of consistency with their names.
So just moving on to question 8.36 and criterion E, requirements. So in criterion E, D, that talks about requirement for 50% affordable housing on the residential element of a development. Now this may take us into the viability assessment and a little bit more discussion on that day. Is the council, does the council think this is realistic of 50%, and how is that going to be dealt with in practice with proposals coming forward?
In terms of the 50%, I think obviously we have the London plan, which is promoting co-location on strategic industrial land and sets the requirements for 50% affordable housing. The council feels that that is a policy that should be and could be applied to the local significant industrial sites also. With the proviso that essentially, the viability testing, etc., route is a route that can be afforded to applicants coming in with through the kind of pre-app process and through application process.
Sorry, Inspector, just add to what David just said. Is it realistic? The Apollo Business Centre site has a planning permission from last year, and as part of their proposal, they proposed 100% affordable housing. That's 42 units, so it is realistic.
Just a point of clarification on that application. It did include a proportion of student accommodation to cross-subsidise the affordable housing. In terms of the exact ratio, we can provide that information to the inspectors.
Thank you. Yes. Ms. Carney.
Just in relation to the criteria under Part E, I haven't got a problem with any of the criteria at all. I think my view would be that the key part of criterion E is Part A, that's little a, and that's the substance, I think, of what that follows on from what E is trying to say. B, sorry, that's little b. That point is essentially covered earlier in the policy, and can't remember whether I think it's part big B. Then little c is part of the planning balance that you would need to apply in any event as part of a consideration. And little d, again, the Lewisham's policy of 50% affordable housing is covered in a general housing policy in any event. So as I say, I haven't got a problem with any of the criteria in themselves. My comment would be, do they need to be replicated? So B to D, do they really need to be replicated under Part E as they're in other policies in any event?
Thank you. Does Council have any thoughts on that?
I think it's a good question, but I do think there is validity in having those repeated here as pointers to those, particularly because they are critical issues for the plan and critical issues for the council. I think the one that I would concede is that part little b, for example, does reflect large B, and therefore that might not be necessary. But I do think it is important to highlight that the redevelopment of this will has to be in terms of the balance and the public benefits, and also it's important within this policy to reiterate the 50% affordable target.
Now, modification 45, I hadn't forgotten it, but that's the cross-reference to the one that I mentioned about EC2B. So EC6A and policy EC2B. So just to cover that one. So that's about retaining existing. So we've covered that one. Anything finally on policy EC6? Okay, let's move on to EC7. I don't have any further questions. There's just a modification. Is there anything else that we need to be aware of with policy EC7, which is the mixed use employment locations? Okay, thank you. And the modification is just to put the abbreviation in. That would be an additional modification. That wouldn't necessarily be a main modification for our purposes. Right, let's move on to policy EC8, non-designated employment sites. I'm going to look at our question 8.44 in relation to criterion C, and this is about the market standard and the justification for the minimum of that 24 months. Obviously, with wanting marketing information for various different reasons, there are often time periods that are specified. So in terms of this, in this policy, criterion C covers it wants recent and continuous marketing covering a minimum of period of 24 months at an appropriate rental or sale value. So I'm just seeking to understand where that 24 months has come from. If anyone can help me on that one, please.
The 24 months, I think, is a sort of industry standard. The London's plan itself speaks to periods lasting at least 12 months. And in fact, the London plan leaves it open for local plans to specify longer periods where they believe it is justified. In my experience, it's quite legitimate and frequently encountered to have local plans speak to longer periods, 36 months. And again, it's an industry standards. I think, as we say in our response at paragraph 8.48.1, the specified time period allows for aberrations in the market to resolve themselves. I think it goes without saying we live in turbulent times, and we were discussing this morning the dynamic nature of retail markets, dynamic and unpredictable nature of retail markets, and I think it's the same is absolutely true within this case. I think it, again, to reiterate a point that's been made a number of times today and previously, the council's not seeking to stifle growth or development, and I think the policy, certainly the council would consider the policy sufficiently flexible to allow for evidence to come through that demonstrates exceptional circumstances, or should that be the case. Thank you.
Thank you. So just in terms of any redevelopment of non-designated employment sites. So regardless of their connectivity, would they be subject to both criterion B and C. So that's or part B and C of this policy.
My apologies, Inspector Bust. Could you just repeat the first part of your question?
Of course. Any redevelopment of non-designated employment sites, if an application came in, would it be tested against both part B and part C, or is it either or? Gibson.
Yeah, so it would be part B in the first instance, because if you came forward with a proposal for a mixed-use development, for example, that retained the same floor space as the existing employment use, then you wouldn't have a loss of any employment use from the non-designated site. Obviously, if they're trying to develop it without retaining the employment use on the site, then part C comes into play.
That's helpful, thank you. Right, let's turn to EC9 and the railway arches. So I'm going to look towards the Arch Company to kick us off with their interest in EC9. It's a very specific policy, so it's probably something that you've got quite a lot to say about.
Perfect. Thank you. I just coming up very quickly. I think first, I think as you said earlier, I think firstly, I think the aspirations are absolutely the same. I think coming back to this low cost workspace point and what's driving that. I think it's really what as a company and working all of the central London boroughs, 4,000 arches, a huge challenge is investment. And we did state in our reps, I'm not going into the detail, but essentially Project 1000, there's a £200 million commitment to bring back 1,000 derelict arches in the period of 2030. So very much aligning with the plan period. The key is where you can actually do that viably, because I think it's quite interesting. Again, I think it's kind of quite an easy assumption to make that actually, I think there's references within the statements, about kind of arches being ready-made and modest investment. Actually, for the kind of rental values you get for a railway arch, it's actually extremely challenging, even with no policy considerations, to actually make a kind of scheme come forward. Because again, I think in the context of low cost, you can have open arches currently are just open land. They're purely kind of storage. Arches that have no lining, so they're not watertight, and again more storage, but some through to a full fit out. And the cost by location can vary hugely in ultimately kind of what you can get for a rental value. I don't go too much of a tangent, but I think the context immediately adjacent to Bermondsey Dive Under site in Lewisham, you have the Southwark arches. There's 120 arches there with land. That's 3 years into a way to try and unlock those. With full kind of working with Southwark, and it's just to try, the investment is at such a scale. So just slightly, I think that's the kind of the challenge. So what we're really key, as part of this local plan, and we've been working, through the sort of various stages, is just to find that there's that flexibility that just allows, I think for these kind of arches to come forward, because it's just so difficult. And I think with particular focus on that kind of the first criterion B, the low cost workspace it's again within that within the nature of the railway arches, there are so many levels of low cost, depending on, is it storage, is it an actual SME that requires containment services, so you could kind of kick out some openly smoking storage may leave, a higher cost could come in, but that's still a very low cost SME. But within the brackets, so it's some sort of clarity and comfort, I think, around how we can kind of ensure that.
I think from your statement on page 4, you were seeking the removal of the reference of lower cost workspace from part B, and or covering the provision of affordable workspace back on EC4 that we talked about earlier.
Yes, we would sort of counter that's already covered. I think it's quite explicit that all floor space is covered within the kind of core policy E4, and then any affordable workspace will have inevitably a 106 obligation on that would require that anyway.
Council want to make any comment?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see any issues with the kind of reference back to EC4 in part B of the plan. I think it's good to hear that we're aligned in terms of the need for the policy. We think, the kind of opportunity that the railway arches afford within Lewisham is unique and does provide great opportunity for affordable workspace, other workspace, and also a multitude of uses in the correct location. So I think we are very much aligned with that. We have talked about reviewing policy EC4 and having another look at the kind of low cost and affordable workspace and those definitions relating back to the London plan, which we will do, which will then have a obviously the reference here will reference back to that EC4, that amended EC4 policy. So I'm sure there's something, again, with our other colleagues, we can thrash that out.
Thank you. That's helpful. Is that helpful to you? So just looking at part C, I think the Arch Company wanted viability referenced in that at the end. So proposals must also investigate and maximise opportunities to improve accessibility by walking and cycling, including connections through existing arches where feasible, appropriate, and then insert and viable. I think that's probably from a more practical point of view, rather than when we're talking about viability, we're talking about calculators, but are we talking about, is it actually viable to make it accessible? Is that?
It's a combination of both. I think we've got kind of schemes where, again, the intention in placemaking is absolutely understood, but there are existing ultimately employment units, and requests are made to sort of punch through and remove them. So it's quite challenging on viability. So it's, again, just linking that all in.
So I think from your response there, it's more viable and practical, isn't it? So it physically getting through some of them, as well as how it affects the viability.
Absolutely. On certain schemes, it's an absolute place, I think, in terms of practicality and access. It's just, I think it has to be sort of taken in the round, again, on that delivery point.
Thank you. Is that something that you feel is helpful in the policy? Mr. Syme, do you want to?
I think my nervousness about including the word viability there is that if we were doing a viability assessment, then it would demonstrate that the viability was worse because you don't have the floor space. And so what would be the incentive of actually doing the kind of placemaking approach, which I think we both, in particular circumstances, not every section of arch needs to have a connection through, but there are many arches where it would be beneficial if a new connection was created, and presumably that would be beneficial from a point of view of pedestrian movement and therefore the attractiveness or the kind of business of those arches. I just think if we're talking about the practicalities, that's one thing, but in terms of the viability, I could see then that every application we might get a case that actually it's not as viable if we put the connection through as it would do if we don't put the connection through, if that makes sense. Sorry. sort of waffling now, but
I think if I can just come,
Edstone.
if I can
Yes.
just very quickly come in and sort of give a sort of a further example, and I think if the inspectors take a walk around the sort of cycle and pedestrian networks that sort of encircle Surrey Canal Triangle and the Bermondsey Dive Under and the Silwood Street sites, one of the distinctive things that you will very quickly come across is the sort of cycle transports that are travelling from the sort of industrial employment uses. I'm tempted to say that the Class E brackets G uses that are becoming in demand in that part of the borough, using the cycle network to plug into the central activity zone, transporting goods that that are being prepared or indeed manufactured in that part of that northern part of the borough. So I'm tempted to sort of reinforce David's argument that it's actually these connections to infrastructure networks are conceivably making the sites more viable and more attractive to potential tenants going forward. So why wouldn't you want them?
Okay, thank you. That's understood. Did you want to make
Well,
a further?
Just one quick follow-up point. I mean, I completely understood, I think, in terms of the placemaking. I think it's, again, with the policy as currently worded, it's about kind of proportionate and scale. We have had schemes where we have, in the, town centre locations, two railway arches, existing lawful use. And as part of an application going in for a very minor development, we've had a request that we give up one of those arches for public realm. That would normally be associated with a big strategic scheme. It's two railway arches. And I think the policy for me as worded, there's no minimum, I think that threshold, it's very to the decision maker on any application to consider, again, where that could be reasonably related, I think, for the scale of development. So as a respectfully, I would kind of hope that there would be some a threshold, I think, on the sort of part C, isn't it, that where that may be the more major schemes, where placemaking would sort of knit in as opposed to ad hoc railway arches.
Thank you. Does the council want to say anything against that one?
yes, I wonder if there's just a slight amendment to part C, which then picks up that point about the proportionality. I can't think off the top of my head what that is at the moment, but we can take that away and reflect that as the tail end of part C.
Yes, thank you. I think that is resolvable, hopefully quite easily. But rather than take up more hearing time to think about it, and you can think about it in another time. So that's helpful. Thank you. So just still on policy EC9, looking at criterion E. So this is about essentially the consultation process. And I'm just wondering, from the council's perspective, are you trying to mandate consultation for applicants to have to consult with Network Rail Transport for London and Highway Authority? They may do anyway because of the nature of the proposal, but I'm thinking in terms of writing it into a policy, because consultation requirements do exist separately, don't they?
Yes, that is correct. I think the intention of the policy is just to highlight that we'd like the applicant to consult with Network Rail or engage with Network Rail and TfL and the Highway Authority prior to the kind of application coming in. Maybe the wording is a little clumsy in part E. But it's really about the kind of engagement beforehand to make sure that, we're not doing anything that has an adverse impact on any future transport improvement or the network, etc., which I'm sure the Arch Company would do, but just to flag that up for any other applicants as well.
Yes, I'm thinking in terms of whether or not that could, the second part, so from Network Rail onwards to the end, whether that could go in the supporting text, because you're trying to guide people and encourage people. I'm just my concern really is to nail it in a policy there might mean that if an applicant hadn't consulted those, it becomes quite a process of, well, where's your statement to say that you've spoken to Network Rail, etc. And I would hope that they would do that anyway, but maybe it's that second half from Network Rail onwards could go in the supporting text in a suitable spot.
Yeah, we'd be happy with that. Yep.
Thank you.
Just to confirm, obviously the Arch Company does liaise with Network Rail consistently. We've got a whole department that communicates with them with all our applications. And I guess on a broader scale, you know, it's an application in any other application would come forward. We would put our planning applications forward with the considered due diligence. So yeah, I would concur that I don't think it's necessary for it to be engrossed in policy like that, perhaps in supporting text or something.
Thank you, that's helpful. We'll add that to the action list then. And I will leave it to the council to find a suitable spot in the supporting text where you think it fits in the most appropriate place. So I think there's one modification under this policy that's already on the list. So that's MO48. Yes, that relates to the we're just on the consultation point, doesn't it? So I think that might be the best place to add the tail end of E into paragraph 8.52. See how it sits when you reread that. Thank you. So policy EC10, just one quick question from me. Question 8.57. So local labour schemes, I've come across those elsewhere. So in the Lewisham context, how long have they been in effect, and what effect has it had on the jobs market? So that's those local labour schemes.
We've had the local labour scheme in effect for a number of years now. If my colleague Spike was here, he'd be able to expand on that. We have the economic development team, which is responsible for the local labour scheme, and again, essentially that benefits from Section 106 agreements and payments made through that. It is something that the council is working positively with developers, particularly to tackle underrepresentation in labour markets, and is consistent with the Mayor of London's skills for London's strategy. I think if the inspectors want further information on specific details of that and the outcomes from that local labour scheme, we can certainly take that away and provide evidence of the current schemes, previous schemes, and also the outputs from that, or the successes of those schemes.
Thank you. I think that would be helpful. So a short note that just draws that together in terms of it's really the outcomes I'm looking towards, and the positive outcomes that flow from that to just underpin, and then that secures that with the evidence.
Yeah, we can certainly do that. Yeah.
So can I make a quick?
Yes.
So we haven't, excuse me, we haven't made representations on this specific point, but I do have experience of it from historically and in the last couple of weeks, which is why I could make a contribution. But we haven't made it in our representation, so it's at your discretion.
Well, I think the council have got some evidence that they're going to give from a Lewisham context. So I think rather than sort of introduce anything new right now, but thank you for.
Sure. It was specifically about the financial aspects of it rather than how it operates.
We've been quite consistent throughout the hearings about not introducing new evidence and sticking to submissions. That the hall sitting next to you will appreciate. So I think we need to sort of be consistent on that point and not introducing new evidence or commenting on things that haven't been in your reps originally. So I think we'll maintain the line on that.
Okay.
But thank you for offering for your views.
All right.
Right, in terms of policy EC11, that's town centres at the heart of our communities. We've got some modifications. I don't have any further questions on that. I'm looking across the table to those that have got retail interest, and there's some shaking of heads. So just in terms of the modifications, so 47, it's a typing error. 49. Also typographical, and MO50. So out of MO50 to the council, there's a proposed change here. I just wonder if you could just explain the background to that one.
The inspectors can lay the blame for MO50's vagueness squarely at my feet. So it's a modification or a potential modification that was highlighted in response to Regulation 19 representation. Again, my own personal apologies on this. It is unsuitably vague and doesn't specify where the modification is, I'm afraid. What we can do, there are some modifications to modifications coming for tomorrow's session. What I can do is revisit this and specify where the change is, but just for complete clarity, it is in response to comments that were received at publication stage, Regulation 19.
Okay, thank you. I heard the words modifications to modifications coming tomorrow. Is that something that will be ready that we could have sooner rather than later, or is that going to be presented tomorrow morning?
My own personal apologies that they are ready. They just need to be sent. Yes, it's so again, without wishing to protest too strongly, it's errors that crept into the modifications that are just being corrected. The modifications themselves are still correct and in place. We're not seeking to introduce anything new. They're just adjustments to the modifications that was already submitted under PD 11.
Right, EC12. So EC12. I've got questions in relation to the threshold and criterion E. Have we covered the threshold point sufficiently? We did mention the threshold this morning.
Just in terms of the threshold approach, I think we were discussing another threshold. I can't recall covering the kind of retail threshold for that would require a retail impact assessment. I may be wrong, but I'm not sure that we covered that in our session this morning.
Yeah, it wasn't covered this morning because it's not an issue for us because this only applies to edge and outer centre development. So we've got no comment on that.
I think this, in terms of, we accept that the MPPF paragraph 90 has a default of 2,500 square metres thresholds, but that is in circumstances where there is no local threshold. I think in parallel with our town centre first approach, we think it's essential that for those main town centre uses within edge of centre or out of centre locations, that threshold is reduced to see what the impact would be.
So is that a concern because you're not sure what the impact would be, or you're seeking to ensure that there isn't an adverse impact? Just so I'm clear on the point.
Yeah, we'd be seeking to ensure that there isn't an adverse impact, and then by requiring the retail impact assessment, and that can be obviously explored through the development management process.
Also, I'd draw your attention to EB24, the Lewisham Retail Impact Assessment, and specifically to paragraph 5.34, which provides the background for the 500 metre threshold.
That's a helpful reference, thank you.
Could you just surmise what that says, please, just for the benefit of participants?
Probably better to read it in context with 532 and 533 as well. So 532 says the NPPF minimum threshold of 2,500 square metres gross remains an inappropriate threshold for Lewisham Borough because this scale of development would exceed the overall long-term retail, food, beverage, leisure projections for most centres areas in the borough. 533 says vacancy rates have increased in Lewisham Borough and the cumulative impact of planned commitments has yet to be felt. The lower retail floor space capacity projections and uncertainties about post-COVID recovery suggest town centres are now more vulnerable to out-of-centre developments. And then 534 says draft policy EC12 has a lower impact threshold of 500 square metres gross, which is broadly consistent with the Sunday trading limit, in brackets 280 square metres net, close brackets. This impact threshold remains appropriate. Given the overlapping nature of catchment areas in Lewisham Borough, a consistent impact threshold should be applied across the authority area. Future policy should also indicate that impact assessments should be proportionate to the scale of development proposed.
So just in terms of criterion F, so we've got the term whilst the term major developments used throughout the plan and the glossary. In EC12, how does this policy respond to losses within the town centre network and hierarchy?
There is no specific reference to losses within the policy. Instead, it effectively part F says it should contribute to the delivery of and support the appropriate distribution of retail uses to help ensure the borough's future need. There is then further detail in some of the subsequent policies, EC 14, major and district centres, for example, that provides a background in terms of primary shopping areas and retail.
Okay, thank you. Should we just move on to EC 13 now? So EC 13, in terms of a definition, a commercial unit, I think we need some form of definition in the glossary, please. If the council could give some thought to that, that would be helpful.
Yep, no problem.
Now for Landsec, I think you've got some points on EC 13. You've been waiting very patiently. Thank you.
To be honest, it's not a major issue anymore because in the statement of common ground, our understanding based on sort of the summary table PD11, that our concern was criteria B. But there's a possibility that could be seen as an impact assessment, but I think the interpretation of our representations and in the statement of common ground, it's accepted that's not what that policy is trying to achieve. It's more sort of principles of change in terms of intensification, in terms of height and other uses, which we fully support, but it's just whether it'd be useful to have a bit of clarity in that policy, just to reflect what the council said in their sort of summary table to our representations on that particular point.
Just in terms of that statement of common ground that you've referenced, is that something that has been submitted? We've got a variety of statements of common ground, and I'm just trying to keep track of which ones we've had in, which ones we're still waiting for, and is that one of the ones that we're still waiting for, or?
We have submitted.
It's on the website.
Yeah.
It's on the.
So you've just got a document reference for me for my note, please. That would be really useful.
Yes, it's LC 24.
It's just on the statement of common ground, given the debate this morning regarding sort of need and our position, I don't think it was beneficial to extend the statement of common ground to set out what our position is in terms of the evidence base, saying we are broadly comfortable with its findings because it's more the interpretation of its findings rather than the actual evidence base itself. So I don't know if it will benefit yourself and the council if we put some text around saying the evidence base, we don't ask for it to be updated again. But we'll touch on it shortly. EC 14 is our sort of principal concern in terms of how that evidence base will then feed into EC 14's requirement. But we're happy to put a few lines, whether the council needs to speak to their retail consultants just to confirm the position. Might be beneficial for all parties to put that in. So we're not in dispute. We're not asking the council to update their evidence base. That's not we sort of moved on from there in terms of our initial sort of Reg 18 reps. We just want to sort of help yourselves and the council the best way forward, really.
So if I understand you correctly, you were talking about updating the statement of common ground to add some additional words into that. Is that? I'm just going to turn to the council in a second. I'm just wondering how useful that would be. Is it just sort of confirmatory? Is that what's going through your mind?
Yeah, it's just clarity, really, because if you read our reps, obviously, particularly in Regulation 18, we moved on, but our position suffered in terms of that because it's accepted by all parties an oversupply of comparison floor space, and Lewisham's a focus of that. So I think fundamentally we are in agreement, albeit the figures may differ. I don't want to sort of confuse any party that we're sort of challenging the evidence base, saying that's unsound, so the plan's unsound. It's just clarity that although we have some concerns, the evidence base fundamentally it is sufficient to provide a sound local plan, just to provide that clarity really, because if you read our reps in isolation, you may not get that view from ourselves. So.
Just to Mr. Syme, is that updating statements of common ground, is that something that you intended on doing through the hearing process?
We hadn't intended to do that. If I'm understanding the point, I think the point is that it's the interpretation of the evidence base and how it then relates to EC 14 and not necessarily the evidence base, but I don't want to put words into your mouth.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I think we touched on it this morning. It's a snapshot in time. So if we do the exercise next year, it could be a different picture. So I think it's accepted that there's an oversupply of comparison floor space by all parties, but so the evidence base doesn't need to be updated. It's the interpretation of that oversupply, how it relates to EC 14, which we'll come on to discuss. So I think it's just a couple of lines may help saying it's agreed between sort of the main parties on this particular issue, because I don't think anyone else raised sort of evidence base as an issue. That we accept the findings and we're comfortable with the approach the council have adopted and being a pragmatic in terms of the local plan being found sound, hopefully.
Just in terms of that point of updating, I'm thinking if we move on into EC 14 and we talk about those, it might be there's some issues in that cover both of those policies, and it might be then beneficial to update that. But I think just sort of that point in isolation might just be updating it for updating its sake. So shall we skip into EC 14 unless there's anything else that anybody else wants to talk about on EC 13? Okay, let's move on into EC 14, which is the major and district centres. So in that policy, there is that 50% target. Now, are you achieving 50% at the moment? Because I think it's slightly under that, isn't it? Is 50% therefore realistic? Do you think you can get that 50%? Because if it's something that you're not achieving now, and then you want to maintain it, is it more sort of aspirational to try and get to that 50%? So is it realistic?
I think in terms of the 50% target, my colleague Keenan did quite a bit of work on this in terms of the town centres and the health of the town centres, and clearly there is kind of fluctuations and variations in terms of retail percentages across our major and district centres. Nevertheless, I think it is important, particularly within our major centres, which are limited to Catford and to Lewisham, and with the aspiration of Lewisham becoming metropolitan centre, that we do provide a target which is aspirational, bearing in mind that we do have sites which are coming on board and on stream, which are delivering the retail floor space, such as Lewisham Gateway, additional retail floor space, such as Lewisham Gateway. I think also in terms of the 50% retail use, again, I think we touched upon it this morning in terms of the requirements. We do think it's fundamentally important to retain retail within our major centres to provide that offer to our residents, but also particularly within Lewisham Town Centre, and again, the aspiration for the Metropolitan Centre to draw from a wider catchment people into the centre. And whilst we fully support the flexibility approach, and we have adopted, a flexible approach within the plan, I think we do need a sort of threshold that we can work with and work to moving forward, particularly with large strategic sites contributing that. I think there's a question about mechanistically how we do that and how we monitor that, which we may want to explore and touch upon. But I think the principle of having retail within our major centres is something that the council feels strongly about to serve our wider community. Again, it's something that we've also been speaking to our development partners, including Landsec and Quad, who have confirmed that they're by necessity, it is essential that retail is kept within our core town centre to provide that draw. Nevertheless, that there is a flexibility in there as well to have other uses, town centre uses that can complement those kind of core retail town centres. And I guess that is that's the policy. That is the purpose of the policy that we're trying to set out here in EC 14.
Thank you. I think the principle of what you're saying is fine. I think just from a practical operation of the policy point of view, if you're not at 50%, does that mean anything that comes along will have to justify themselves if they're non-retail?
Apologies, I'm just getting some information from my colleague there. So in terms of the evidence base that we've done, the 42.5% that's within the town centre covers the entirety of the town centre, not just the core primary shopping area. I think as a point of action, we might go away and look at the primary shopping area as it is defined within the local plan and what the percentage is currently. I think given the nature of it, and obviously I don't want to, I think it will be quite high given the retail units that we have within that shopping area. But if we could take that away and look at updating that and providing the evidence for that.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
I think in terms of the 50% target as well, it's why is it 50%? Could it be 70%? Could it be 40%? And I think that links back to the existing percentage in the town centre at present. So it's just really a bit more justification in why the 50% target was chosen.
Yes, I think if we can take that away and we can provide just a short written statement on that, providing you with the actual percentages for the shopping, the primary shopping areas in particular, and then the rationale for the 50%.
Thank you. Yes, I think it's going to come on to shopping area impact statements for in-centre development.
Yeah, it's just going back to sort of 50%, because obviously with Class E now into effect, there's nothing stopping existing units becoming a restaurant overnight. There's no planning control. So the way it's currently worded, it sort of says development proposals that will result in a percentage of retail use in the PSA falling below this threshold will only be supported when you do a shopping impact assessment. So there's a possibility, because Landsec only control part of the primary shopping area, and we're working with the council, our aim is to achieve 50% retail. Obviously, as we discussed earlier, the retail market is changing rapidly. So we'd ideally like some flexibility in terms of the uses, and I think it's important to remember, to go back to policy EC11, where it talks about you need to adapt and change, and a restaurant or other town centre uses can contribute to the vitality and viability of the centre. It's not just retail. And if you go to Lewisham town centre, I think there is a lack of sort of restaurants, evening economy, which our development provides an opportunity. But I think it's just some clarity. As you said, you're going to clarify the 50%, but also it talks about 50% of retail uses as a proportion of all units. Does that mean 50% of units have to be retail? Because obviously retail's changed a lot, and a lot of the anchor tenants will be large units, where it could be over 50% of the floor space, but only 20% of the units. So just some clarity on there. I think we'd like to work with the council on this, and obviously we're sort of working with the council on our scheme, but with just some flexibility to reflect sort of the market and how it changes, and how we can contribute to the town centre vitality and viability.
Thank you. Is that something to explore outside of a hearing session?
Yes, I think so, because I mean, again, I think we're wanting the same thing in terms of the vibrancy and vitality of the town centre, and we're certainly wanting, a diverse range of appropriate town centre uses, and I can certainly see, in terms of the way that the Part D is written, that there might be some confusion about how we monitor that moving forward. Is it 50% of all units, or is it 50% of floor space, etc.? So we can, I think if we can, if I may, we can suggest that we can wrap that up in the work that we do on that PSA, and also suggest if there is changes required, then some minor modifications, and happy to work with Land Securities and Quad on that to make sure that that is meeting both of our requirements.
Okay, thank you. That would be helpful. Just in terms of those shopping area impact statements for in-centre development and Landsec's concern with that, please.
Yeah, we do have some concern whether it's contrary to sort of national policy in the London plan area, because we are in-centre development, and main town centre uses should be focused in town centre locations. So it would seem a bit odd to do an impact assessment for effectively policy compliant development. I understand where the council are coming from, because they want to try and protect sort of the retail sort of purpose, but the way policies move with Class E, and it's more challenging to do that. And I think the main thing is to achieve main town centre uses, which would contribute to the health of the town centre, which this will achieve without having to do a sort of impact assessment again for in-centre development, which I don't think is necessarily required.
So in terms of the changes that you are seeking, what would they be to this policy?
But to removal of the requirement for sort of in-centre development, main town centre uses as defined in the NPPF, to require an impact assessment, or maybe a toned down version, because there's a lot of criteria it's asking an application to address there, whether there could be some flexibility in terms of what's actually required, because I think it needs to be acknowledgement. If you read policy EC11 and supporting text, that clearly shows that, or demonstrates that, wider uses and adapted uses should be encouraged, but then policy EC14 seems to sort of restrict that to focus on a Class EA acknowledged by parties in the retracting market in terms of the comparison offer.
Mr. Syme, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think we can have a look at this. Obviously, again, I think we talked about the development of Class E and kind of uncharted territory relating to particularly to local plans and the provision of retail. I guess the council is nervous of particularly in major and district centres, of effectively retail being entirely replaced by other town centre uses. And what we're trying to do is to find a mechanism by which we can control particularly retail within an environment where we have the new Class E, and it's fairly fluid in terms of the change of uses between that class.
Because just on that, I think a common theme of today, I think we want the same thing. Landsec's intentions are to secure anchor retail tenants, because no point having restaurants with no sort of attractors. So it's in our own interest to achieve that sort of anchor tenants. It's just that flexibility, that 50% is more of an issue potentially than the shopping impact assessment, because we think we probably have to address that anyway, because the nature of the scheme will have a positive impact, but that 50% does potentially raise an issue. Could be a reason for refusal, because already below, as you suggested, below 50%, and we're just going to add to that. Is that a reason for refusal, even though we'd have a positive impact on the town centre?
Just a point of clarification, the primary shopping area, was that reviewed as part of the retail study? The extent of
the primary shopping area wasn't part of the Lewisham retail impact assessment. It was an assessment carried out internally by officers, by the officer present today, Keenan Hassan. He can certainly take you through the methodology that we used for that, if you would like. But it is a document that we have submitted.
I don't think we have the time to do that. Thank you for the offer. I think I know a lot of sort of areas are looking at a kind of a more constrained primary shopping area, tighter primary shopping area, but consolidating retail uses within that to concentrate that and increase footfall within that area, which I think helps to ensure that there's a strong kind of retail core, notwithstanding the use classes order hasn't helped in that sense.
Yeah, certainly that's the approach that we've taken, and I think on page 253 of the local plan, you'll see the